Chapter 24. It had rained so hard for the past 2 days that no one had gone to the village, which was nearly 3 miles from the farm. But when the storm was over at last, George and Elizabeth tramped down and came back at dusk with a bag full of mail. Their clothes were mud bespattered, and they hurried upstairs to change before supper, while Roger settled back in his chair and spread open his New York paper. It was July 30, 1914. From a habit grown out of 30-odd years of business life, Roger read his paper in a fashion of his own. By instinct, his eye swept the page for news dealing with individual men, for it was upon people's names in print that he had made his living. And so, when he looked at this strange front page, it gave him a swift twinge of alarm. For the news was not of men, but of nations. Austria was massing her troops along the Serbian frontier, and Germany, Italy, Russia, France, and even England all were in a turmoil, with panics in their capitals, money markets going wild. Edith came down in her neat black dress with its narrow white collar, ready for supper. She glanced at her father. "Why, what's the matter?" "Look at this." And he tossed her a paper. "Oh," she murmured softly. "Oh, how frightful that would be." And she read on with lips compressed. But soon there came from the room upstairs the sudden cry of one of her children, followed by a shrill wail of distress, and dropping the paper she hurried away. Roger continued his reading. Deborah came. She saw the paper Edith had dropped, picked it up, and sat down to read, and there were a few moments of absolute silence. Then Roger heard a quivering breath, and glancing up he saw Deborah's eyes, intent and startled, moving down the columns of print in a swift, uncomprehending way. "Pretty serious business," he growled. "It can't happen," she exclaimed, and they resumed their reading. In the next 3 days, as they read the news, they felt war like a whirlpool, sucking in all their powers to think or feel, felt their own small personal plans whirled about like leaves in a storm. And while their minds, at first dazed and stunned by the thought of such appalling armies, battles, death, and desolation, slowly cleared and they strove to think, and Roger thought of business shivered to atoms in every land, and Deborah thought of schools by thousands all over Europe closing down, in cities and in villages, in valleys and on mountainsides, of homes in panic everywhere, of all ideals of brotherhood shaken, bending, tottering. War broke out in Europe. What is this going to mean to me? Millions of people were asking that, and so did Roger and Deborah. The same night they left for New York, while Edith, with a sigh of relief, settled back into her family. The next morning at his office, Roger found John waiting with misery stamped on his face. John had paid small heed to war. Barely stopping for sleep in the last 2 days, he had gone through scores and hundreds of papers, angrily skipping all those names of kings and emperors and czars, and searching instead for American names, names of patrons, business, gone. Each hour he had been opening mail and piling up letters, canceling contracts, ordering service discontinued. Roger sat down at his desk. As he worked and figured and dictated letters, glancing into the outer rooms, he saw the long rows of girls at tables, obviously trying to pretend that there was work for them to do. He felt them anxiously watching him, as in other offices everywhere millions of other employees kept furtively glancing at their chiefs. War, he thought. Shall I close down? He shrank from what it would mean to those girls. Business will pick up again soon. A few days, weeks, that's all I need. And he went to his bank. No credit there. He tried other sources, all he could think of, racking his brains as he went about town, but still he could not raise a loan. Finally, he went to the firm which had once held a mortgage on his house. The chief partner had been close to Bruce, an old college friend. and when even this friend refused him aid. "It's a question of Bruce's children," Roger muttered, reddening. He felt like a beggar, but he was getting desperate. The younger man had looked away and was nervously tapping his desk with his pen. "Bad as that, eh?" he answered. "Then I guess it's got to be done." He looked anxiously up at Roger, who just at that moment appeared very old. "Don't worry, Mr. Gale," he said. "Somehow or other we'll carry you through." "Thank you, sir." Roger rose heavily, feeling weak, and took his departure. "This is war," he told himself, "and I've got to look after my own." But he had a sensation almost of guilt, as upon his return to his office he saw those suddenly watchful faces. He walked past them and went into his room, and again he searched for ways and means. He tried to see his business as it would be that autumn, to see the city, the nation, the world as it would be in the months ahead. Repeatedly he fought off his fears, but slowly and inexorably the sense of his helplessness grew clear. "No, I must shut down," he thought. On his way home that evening, in a crush at a turbulent corner, he saw a big truck jam into a taxi, and with a throb of rebellion he thought of his son-in-law who was dead. Just the turn of a hair and Bruce might have lived and been here to look after the children. At the prospect of the crisis, the strain he saw before him, Roger again felt weak and old. He shook off his dread and strode angrily on. In his house, the rooms downstairs were still dismantled for the summer. There was emptiness and silence, but no serenity in them now, only the quiet before the storm which he could feel from far and near was gathering about his home. He heard Deborah on the floor above, and went up and found her making his bed, for the chambermaid had not yet come. Her voice was a little unnatural. "It has been a hard day, hasn't it? I've got your bathroom ready," she said. "Don't you want a nice cool bath? Supper will be ready soon." When, a half hour later, somewhat refreshed, Roger came down to the table, he noticed it was set for two. "Isn't Alan coming?" he asked. Her mobile features tightened. "Not till later," she replied. They talked little, and the meal was short. But afterwards, on the wooden porch, Deborah turned to her father. "Now tell me about your office," she said. "There's not enough business to pay the rent." "That won't last." "I'm not so sure." "I am," she said determinedly. Her father slowly turned his head. "Are you, with this war?" he asked. Her eyes met his and moved away in a baffled, searching manner. She has troubles of her own, he thought. "How much can we run the house on, Deborah?" he asked her. At first she did not answer. What was it, about 6,000 last year? "I think so," she said restlessly. "We can cut down on that, of course." "With Edith and the children here?" "Edith will have to manage it. There are others to be thought of." "The children in your schools, you mean?" "Yes," she answered with a frown. "It will be a bad year for the tenements. But please go on and tell me. What have you thought of doing?" "Mortgage the house again," he replied. "It hasn't been easy, for money is tight, but I think I'll be able to get enough to just about carry us through the year. At home, I mean," he added. "And the office?" "Shut down," he said. She turned on him fiercely. "You won't do that." "What else can I do? Turn all those girls away?" she cried. At her tone, his look grew troubled. "How can I help myself, Deborah? If I kept open, it would cost me over $500 a week to run. Have I $500 a week to lose?" "But I tell you it won't last," she cried, and again the baffled, driven expression swept over her expressive face. "Can't you see this is only a panic, and keep going somehow? Can't you see what it means to the tenements? Hundreds of thousands are out of work. They're being turned off every day, every hour. Employers all over are losing their heads, and City Hall is as mad as the rest. They've decided already down there to retrench." He turned with a quick jerk of his head. "Are they cutting you down?" She set her teeth. "Yes, they are. But the work in my schools is going on. Every bit of it is, for every child. I'm going to find a way, she said, and he felt a thrill of compassion. I'm sorry to hear it, he muttered. You needn't be. She paused a moment, smiled, and went on in a quieter voice. Don't think I'm blind. I'm sensible. I see you can't lose 500 a week, but why not try what other employers, quite a few, have decided to do? Call your people together, explain how it is, and ask them to choose a committee to help you find which ones need jobs the most. Keep all you can, on part-time, of course, but at least pay them something. Carry them through. You'll lose money by it, I haven't a doubt, but you've already found you can mortgage the house. And remember, besides, that I shall be here. I'm not going to marry now. Her father looked at her quickly. And of course, I'll expect to do my share toward meeting the expenses. Moreover, I know we can cut down. Retrench, said Roger grimly. Turn off the servants instead of the clerks. No, only one of them, Martha, upstairs, and she is to be married. We'll keep the cook and the waitress. Edith will have to give up her nurse, and it will be hard on her, of course, but she'll have to realize this is war, Deborah said sharply. Besides, she urged, it's not going to last. Business everywhere will pick up. In a few weeks, or months at most. The war can't go on. It's too horribly big. She broke off and anxiously looked at him. Her father was still frowning. I'm asking you to risk a good deal, she continued, her voice intense and low. But somehow, dearie, I always feel that this old house of ours is strong. It can stand a good deal. We can all of us stand so much as soon as we know we have to. The lines of her wide, sensitive mouth tightened firmly once again. It's all so vague and uncertain, I know, but one thing at least is sure. This is no time for people with money, no matter how little, to shut themselves up in their own little houses and let the rest starve or beg or steal. This is the time to do our share. And she waited, but he made no reply. Every nation at war is doing it, Dad. Become like one big family, with everyone helping, doing his share. Must a nation be at war to do that? Can't we be brothers without the guns? Can't you see that we're all of us stunned and trying to see what war will mean to all the children in the world? And while we're groping, can't we give each other a hand? Still, he sat motionless there in the dark. At last he stirred heavily in his chair. I guess you're right, he told her. At least I'll think it over and try to work out something along the lines you spoke of. Again there was a silence. Then his daughter turned to him with a little deprecating smile. You'll forgive my preaching to you, Dad. No preaching, he said gruffly. Just ordinary common sense. A little later Alan came in, and Roger soon left them and went to bed. Alone with Baird, she was silent a moment. Well, have you thought it over? She asked. Wasn't I right in what I said? At the anxious ring in her low, clear voice, leaning over, he took her hand, and he felt it hot and trembling as it quickly closed on his. He stroked it slowly, soothingly. In the semi-darkness he seemed doubly tall and powerful. Yes, I'm sure you were right, he said. Spring at the latest. I'll marry you then. Her eyes were intently fixed on his. Come here, she whispered sharply, and Baird bent over and held her tight. Tighter, she whispered, tighter. There. I said spring at the latest. I can't lose you, Alan, now. She suddenly quivered as though from fatigue. I'm going to watch you close down there, he said in a moment huskily. Chapter 25. Roger saw little of Deborah in the weeks that followed. She was gathering her forces for the long struggle she saw ahead, and his own worries filled his mind. On his house he succeeded in borrowing $5,000 at 10%, and in his office he worked out a scheme along the lines of Deborah's plan. At first it was only a struggle to save the remnants of what was left. Later, the tide began to turn. New business came into the office again, but only a little, and then it stopped. Hard times were here for the winter. Soon Edith would come with the children. He wondered how sensible she would be. It was going to mean a daily fight to make ends meet, he told himself, and guiltily he decided not to let his daughter know how matters stood in his office. Take care of your own flesh and blood, and then be generous as you please. That had always been his way. And now Deborah had upset it by her emotional appeal. How dramatic she is at times, he reflected in annoyance. Just lets herself out and enjoys herself. He grew angry at her interference, and more than once he resolved to shut down. But back in the office, before those watchful faces, still again he would put it off. Wait a little, we'll see, he thought. In the meantime, in this interplay, these shifting lights and shadows which played upon the history of the life of Roger's home, there came to him a diversion from an unexpected source. Laura and Harold returned from abroad. Soon after landing, they came to the house, and talking fast and eagerly, they told him how they had eluded the war. For them, it had been a glorious game. In Venice in early August, Harold had seen a chance for a big stroke of business. He had a friend who lived in Rome, an Italian close to his government. At once they had joined forces, worked day and night, pulled wires, used money judiciously here and there, and so had secured large orders for munitions from the USA. Then to get back to God's country. There came the hitch. They were too late. Naples, Genoa, and Milan all were filled with tourist mobs. They took a train for Paris, and reaching the city just a week before the end of the German drive, they found it worse than Italy. But there Hal had a special pull, and by the use of those wits of his, not to be downed by refusals, he got passage at last for Laura, himself, and his new Italian partner. At midnight, making their way across the panic-stricken city, and at the station, struggling through a wild and half-crazed multitude of men and women and children, they boarded a train and went rushing westward right along the edge of the storm. To the north, the Germans were so close that Laura was sure she could hear the big guns. The train kept stopping to take on troops. At dawn, some 20 wounded men came crowding into their very car, bloody and dirty, pale and worn, but gaily smiling at the pain, and saying, "Sana ferea, madame." Later Harold opened his flask for some splendid Breton soldier boys just going into action, and they stood up with flashing eyes and shouted out the Marseillaise, while Laura shivered and thrilled with delight. "I nearly kissed them all," she cried. Roger greatly enjoyed the evening. He had heard so much of the horrors of war. Here was something different, something bright and vibrant with youth and adventure. Here at last was the thrill of war, the part he had always read about. He glanced now and then at Deborah and was annoyed by what he saw, for although she said nothing and forced a smile, he could easily tell by the set of her lips that Deborah thoroughly disapproved. All right, that was her way, he thought. But this was Laura's way, shedding the gloom and the tragic side as a duck will shed water off its back, a duck with bright new plumage fresh from the shops of the Rue de la Paix, and taking some pleasure out of life. What an ardent, gleaming beauty she was, he thought as he watched this daughter of his. And underneath his enjoyment, too, though Roger would not have admitted it, was a sense of relief in the news that at least one man in the family was growing rich instead of poor. Already Hal and his partner, a fascinating creature according to Laura's description, were fast equipping shrapnel mills. Plainly, they expected a tremendous rush of business, and no matter how you felt about war, the word profits at least had a pleasant sound. "How has the war hit you, sir?" Harold asked his father-in-law. "Oh, so. I'll get on, my boy," was Roger's quiet answer. For Harold was not quite the kind he would ever like to ask for aid. Still, if the worst came to the worst, he would have someone to turn to. Long after they had left the house, he kept thinking over all they had said. What an amazing time they had had, the two young scalawags. Deborah was still in the room, and as she sat working at her desk, her back was turned and she did not speak. But little by little, her father's mood changed. Of course she was right, he admitted, for now they were gone, the spell they had cast was losing a part of its glamour. Yes, their talk had been pretty raw. Sheer, unthinking selfishness, a bold rush for plunder, and a dash to get away, trampling over people half crazed, women and children in panicky crowds, and leaving behind them, so to speak, Laura's joyous, rippling laugh over their own success in the game. Yes, there was no denying the fact that Hal was rushing headlong into a savage, dangerous game, a scramble and a gamble, with adventurers from all over Europe gathering here and making a little world of their own. He would work and live at a feverish pitch, and Laura would go at it as hard as he. Roger thought he could see their winter ahead, how they would pile up money and spend. All at once, as though some figure silent and invisible were standing close behind him, from far back in his childhood, a memory flashed into his mind of a keen and clear October night, when Roger, a little shaver of 9, had stood with his mother in front of the farmhouse and listened to the faint, sharp roll of a single drum far down in the valley, and his mother's grip had hurt his hand, and a lump had risen in his throat, as Dan, his oldest brother, had marched away with his company of New Hampshire mountain boys. "We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more." Dan had been killed at Shiloh. And it must be like that now in France. No, he did not like the look which he had seen on Laura's face as she had talked about the war and the fat profits to be made. Was this all we Yankees had to say to the people over in Europe? Frowning and glancing at Deborah's back, he saw that she was tired. It was nearly midnight, but still she kept working doggedly on, moving her shoulder muscles at times as though to shake off aches and pains, then bending again to her labor, her fight against such heavy odds in the winter just beginning for those children in the tenements. He recalled a fragment of the appeal she had made to him only the month before. "Can't you see that we're all of us stunned and trying to see what war will mean to all the children in the world? And while we're groping, can't we give each other a hand?" And as he looked at his daughter, she made him think of her grandmother, as she had so often done before, for Deborah, too, was a pioneer. She, too, had lived in the wilderness, clearing roads through jungles, yes, and freeing slaves of ignorance and building a nation of new men. And now she was doggedly fighting to save what she had builded, not from the raids of the Indians, but from the ravages of this war, which was sweeping civilization aside. With her school behind her, so to speak, she stood facing this great enemy with stern and angry, steady eyes, her pioneer grandmother come to life. So, with the deep craving which was a part of his inmost self, Roger tried to bind together what was old and what was new. But his thoughts grew vague and drifting. He realized how weary he was, and said good night and went to bed. There, just before he fell asleep, again he had a feeling of relief at the knowledge that at least one in the family was to be rich this year. With a guilty sensation he shook off the thought, and within a few moments after that his harsh regular breathing was heard in the room.